We're all here today to oppose the bailout of 38 studios, one of the biggest taxpayer rip-offs in recent memory, but it won't be the biggest if this keeps going, because letting this bailout happen will just encourage more bailouts like it. And we see a big distinction here. All of the top leaders of our state say, we must pay. We must pay these bondholders, even though they're already insured. But unfortunately, they're not the ones who pay, because they're going to use our taxpayer money to do it. And even though all the top leadership of the state say we must pay, the vast majority of ordinary people say, no, we don't want to pay. Let's not pay. So we're going to have a number of speakers to talk to you today, and we'll start with one of the Democratic candidates for governor this year, Todd Giroux. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. I have a message for Rhode Island that puts people first. For too long, accountability and transparency have been demanded by the people of Rhode Island, and I support repealing and not paying for 38 studios. The bad investments of the past are discouraging the future for investment in Rhode Island. I have a message that says Rhode Island and every state in the United States should be on the same level playing field as the banks. Rhode Island should have a relationship with the U.S. Treasury where we can have access to 0.25% interest, just like the banks. And in doing so, we can create commerce funds, infrastructure funds, using the repaid TARP. The 2008 Economic Stabilization Act provided billions of dollars of investment for the states in this country for distressed communities. And I'm calling for repaid TARP to be reutilized for the people of Rhode Island. We need to overcome the bad policy and the bad investments of 38 studios. Those investors were qualified, they knew what they were getting into, and I say don't pay for 38 studios. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Next up, we have the head of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party, Mike Rollins.
Straight face.
Okay.
Straight face.
Face this way.
Face this way?
Yes.
From a libertarian perspective, one of our key political issues is honesty. We as libertarians renounce any kind of deception or fraud in terms of political efforts, and moral obligation bonds, quote unquote, are a prime example of fraud. They are neither moral nor a legitimate obligation. What they are is a scam deliberately designed to bypass the right of the voters to vote upon whether or not to spend government money. That is why I am here representing the Libertarian Party on this rally.
Thank you. Next up, we have a representative of Occupy Providence, the group that organized this rally. Occupy Providence has been protesting against the 38 Studios bailout since June 2012 for the last 2 years, and we hope it doesn't have to take longer, but we will take longer if we need to. Please welcome Paul Hubbard.
Hey everyone. So basically what we have here is the same old story, the 1% getting paid off, the 99% getting shafted. The state bought insurance, $600,000. They paid for insurance on these bonds, and they refused to use the insurance. The insurance was specifically for a default, so that the state taxpayers would not be on the hook. And again, it's cronyism, it's the 1% looking out for their own interests, all the corrupt politicians in there, 90% of them are Democrats, and this is a shame. I, Occupy Providence, first noticed this question of the bailout of 38 studios back a couple of years ago. We were some of the first to organize against it, and it's unfortunate that we're back here 2 years later having to organize against it again. It's every year the payments that the state is going to be making on these bonds is going to get bigger and bigger. Like last year, the excuse was, well, it's only a couple of million for the first. Yeah, they took $24 million away from the developmentally disabled. Give me a break. It's strictly a question of our services versus their bailout. And I think the state should be spending the money on services for the people of Rhode Island. So that's about all I got to say. No bailout for 38 studios. Put the money to work for Rhode Island citizens. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. We were planning to have Gary Sass, the former head of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, who's been a big who's been a good business-oriented voice against this bailout. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it today, but he's given good speeches and good evidence against this bailout in the past. So unfortunately, he's not able to speak today. We will hear from some other experts later. But now, after the Occupy Providence speaker we just had, we will move to the other side of the political spectrum, and we will have a speech from the head of the Rhode Island Tea Party, Mike Piana. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, folks. You know, there's a lot of people that like to talk about how the Rhode Island Tea Party and Occupy Providence are as diametrically opposed as is possible to be. But in reality, I don't care who you are. When you believe in civil liberties and you believe in the principles of real free enterprise and real free markets, you can't be that much opposed. And I don't care if you're a bistro owner on Hope Street who thinks Barack Obama is the best thing since sliced bread, or you're a hardware store in Foster who gave tons of money to Mitt Romney. Both of those people are getting the absolute shaft by this 38 studio scandal, scam, fraud, ripoff, and monstrosity. Okay, I don't care what letter you have after your name, we're all getting slammed. Okay, you can be a landscape contractor who is diehard Second Amendment and who wouldn't vote Democrat if you paid him, or you could be an Occupy Providence supporter who's trying to start a small business making jewelry or making artistic postcards, and at the same time, those people are getting slammed by the insider corporatism and enemies of capitalism that is stuff like 38 Studios that gives everything to the insiders, takes your tax money and gives it to special interest elitists who are stuck assuming zero responsibility for this scandal. We're the people who are getting hammered by it. There was criminal activity apparently that went on here, because why are they calling so much, oh, we have to pay it, we have to pay it? People, these are moral obligation bonds. There is no legal liability for this. We don't have to pay this. All they say is, oh, the investigation will be done. I say baloney. If this thing gets paid, that investigation will come to a screeching halt like you slam the brakes on it. And that's the biggest issue of this, is stopping this culture of corporatist corruption that allows the 38 studios of the world in the first place. Because if we don't, it's just like was said earlier by my esteemed colleagues, this same thing will happen again. It'll be bigger, it'll be more intense. We've got to stop it. If the Rhode Island Tea Party and Occupy Providence can come in such agreement on such an important point, then how is it possible that we can't get every Rhode Islander roused to tell the people in this building who work for all of us, they are our employees, people, enough. This must stop. You cannot make this payment, and you have to force this investigation. I don't care if people go to jail. This must stop. Thank you.
So we have a number of speakers. Not all of them are here yet, and we do want to open this up also to people who were not specifically invited to speakers. So we're willing to hear from other people. Richard, I saw you speaking to the Channel 6 before. So we are going to intersperse among our regular speakers. We're going to also include some other people speaking too. Richard, are you still here? Richard left. Okay. Chris, would you like to speak?
Yes. My name is Christopher Curry. I'm the Rhode Island MoveOn.org coordinator. And I'd like to point out one of the arguments that the top-ranking politicians in our state are using to justify using taxpayers' dollars to repay the 38 special debt, studios debt, is that Wall Street would retaliate. If we don't do that, Wall Street would retaliate by raising our interest rates on all our other bonds. And I consider that to be very disingenuous, because our state has the authority to charter a bank of the state of Rhode Island. There is no good reason why they don't do that. And if they were to charter a bank of the state of Rhode Island, they could put all of Rhode Island's tax revenue funds in it and various other types of investment funds in it, and then they could leverage that at a ratio of at least 10 to 1 to refinance all of its loans to Wall Street at far lower interest rates. And there's no good reason why we don't do that. So North Dakota has done this, and they were the only ones that were relatively unaffected by the Wall Street crash. And there's no reason why we can't do the same thing. So this is my answer to the people who claim, well, you know, those guys in Wall Street will retaliate. Well, screw them. Refinance the loans with our own money. Thank you. Bye.
Just to follow up on Chris's point there, North Dakota usually has the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and we usually have the highest. And may have something to do with the fact that North Dakota doesn't depend on Wall Street so much and these corrupt deals. It has a state-owned bank.
So it's a sacrifice zone.
Yeah, and they said that 38 Studios was going to help our unemployment rate, and in fact it was just an insider deal because somebody knew somebody. Okay, next up we have the Greg Garrett from the Rhode Island Green Party.
How y'all doing? I have a slightly different perspective on the EDC and these things, because I actually dealt with the EDC long before this around them trying to build a megaport at Quonset. And when they tried to do that, we actually had a public process. The people spoke, and they did not buy this white elephant that would have opened up right in time for the recession. So we did not, we saved, on that one, we saved $1 billion by having a public process. What these guys in here forget is that economic development is actually a public process. If it wasn't a public process, why would every businessman in America be asking for some tax break or some subsidy? That is the whole point. We do have a mixed economy. It's not just a private economy. It's not just a public economy. It's a mixed economy. And so when you have a mixed economy, the only way to make the economy work is to have a public process as to what's the right investment for the community. The fact that these guys don't believe that and don't have a process for what the public really needs. I mean, if we start economic development in this state, what you really need to do is start at the bottom. You don't start with the high tech, you start with the basics, food, energy. You know, we need to grow about 20 times as much food in this state as we do now. And that's the future of our economy. As climate change goes on, these kinds of deals are going to become even more obvious. You know, the economy is not going where these guys think it's going. It's not going to get a lot bigger. It's actually going to start shrinking as the ecological resources happen and crash, as climate change makes our economy worse. We need to be prepared. So the more we invest in things like 38 Studios, the less prepared we are for climate change. So these guys need to figure that out. They haven't yet, but, you know, democracy shall prevail.
All right, Greg.
Next up, we have Jared Paul from the Providence Poetry Slam.
Yes. Jared Paul, ladies and gentlemen.
Jared in the house. Definitely great to be here today. I think folks thought it would be a good idea if we break up the monotony a little bit with a poem or with prose. I wanted to say, though, before we move any further, I agree with everything that's been said here so far. And if we really take things even a step further and look at 38 studios and supposedly the 500 Rhode Island jobs it was supposed to create, and in the end it didn't really create more than 250 jobs, most of which were not Rhode Island jobs. If you took that $78 million and divide it by 30,000, you get 2,600. Then you divide it again by 2, which is the 2 years it took for 38 studios to piss $78 million away into nothing. You could have put 1,300 Rhode Islanders to work at $30,000 a year for 2 years. Instead of a failed, non-existent video game that did nothing. So that's why I'm here today, and that's what this piece I'm about to share is about, because I'm not middle class. I've never been anything like middle class. And this affects everybody. Money like that gets passed is supposed to go to create jobs for working class people and folks who are looking for opportunities who don't have them. This is, and you know, that has a big effect more than just Kurt Schilling having to sell his coin collection. Real-time effects in all of our lives. This is called math too simple for experts to understand. And, you know, because you can go to jail for stealing $500, but you can't go to jail for stealing $78 million if you have the right lawyer. Trying to reduce crime without first accounting for how to end poverty is like blaming an umbrella for the rain. We steal, and we violence, and we push when folks are desperate, hungry, when our families don't have what they need, when the jobs we scrape up aren't enough to live on, don't add up to the sum of the government assistance employment just disqualified us for. And when not only is the work shit, but there are no jobs at all, or none that will give our application a serious look because of our record, or our race, or our education. When the neighborhood is so systematically under-resourced that we are many generations deep in the same shit, in the same circle, when it feels like there's no other way and nothing will ever change. Don't worry about psychological surveys, or polls, or just say no t-shirts. Don't worry about getting tough on crime, or scared straight theatrics. Build more schools, create more classrooms, so we are never in a class with more than 15 students at once like they do in those private schools. And hire a new teacher and teacher's assistants for each one. Hire one new social worker for every 5 youth in state custody. Pay them what they're worth. Stop locking folks up for victimless crimes that people, especially white people with the money for lawyers, never do a day for. Give us a fighting chance, a living wage to work your counters, clean your bathrooms, raise your kids, and stock your shelves. Pay us like human beings to mop floors and haul shingles up to the roof. You don't need super cops or FBI. You don't need Bill Gates. Teach for America, race to the top, or no child left behind. Pay us what you owe. Let everyone take off from the same starting line, and we'll do the rest.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Next up, we have Representative Spencer Dickinson, Democrat from North Kingstown. Thank you.
Can I stand in the shade? Sure.
Just want to say a couple things about the 38 Studios issue. It's getting bigger, it's getting worse, and I'm not sure anybody understands how bad it really is. It's a long, sad story. It begins with a ball player that wanted to come to Rhode Island. He needed $75 million to produce a product. And unfortunately, by the time he was on his way here, I believe that he and many other people, including the financial experts, knew that that product would never be produced because he was not going to get $75 million. There were 2 reserve funds set up, $12 million apiece, so that we could buy 2 years. But the 2 years is over, and we're there now. The time has come. The state of Rhode Island, as I see it, is sitting at the kitchen table with a pair of scissors in one hand and a credit card in the other hand. That credit card has been out there. It's been abused, and we have a decision to make. And I think you know what that decision is. I know what I'm going to do. I'm cutting the credit card. That will happen in the next couple of weeks, probably sooner than you think. There's a couple of documents I want to reference. You've all seen them, but they have to be mentioned. This is the Rhode Island Constitution, Section 16. Just read a couple of sentences. The General Assembly shall have no powers without the express consent of the people to incur state debts. And it goes on to a limit. But essentially, you can't sell a bond without the approval of the people, unless you think of a trick. Well, the trick was thought of by John Mitchell, who ended up in prison because he was doing some things for Richard Nixon that he shouldn't have done. He and Nelson Rockefeller figured out the idea of citizen voter end run bonds, and they decided that that wasn't a very good name. So they thought maybe they would try Mama's apple pie bonds, and that didn't work, and today we're stuck with the term moral obligation bonds. I can't believe we actually use that term for what we're doing. The prospectus and all the documents pertaining to these bonds are full of disclaimers. Here's one, you've all heard it. I'll just read a few words anyway. I just love these words. The 2010 bonds and the interest thereon do not constitute a debt, liability, or obligation of the state or any political subdivision thereof. And it goes on to say, and neither the faith and credit nor the taking or taxing power of the state or any political subdivision or municipality thereof is pledged to the payment of the 2010 bonds. It couldn't be much clearer, but it appears more than once in the same document, and I don't know if you can see it, it's in capital letters. Now, why is it there? It's there for a legal reason. It's there because if it weren't there, the bonds would be illegal. The bonds would be illegal because it's unconstitutional to sell bonds without the approval of the voters. Something's going on here. This isn't adding up. So you say, well, these bonds get around the Constitution because we say right in them that the thing that the Constitution says you can't do, we're not doing it. But now other people are telling us we have to pay these bonds. And Wall Street is telling us we have to pay these bonds. No, we don't have to pay these bonds. And more importantly, we must not pay these bonds. And there's a reason. There's a couple of reasons. One reason is that we need to defend and maintain the integrity of our Constitution. If anybody can come here and make us pay any so-called moral obligation, citizen end run bond, whatever you want to call it, mama apple pie bond, whatever, if they can force us and intimidate us into paying those bonds, the Constitution has no meaning. The defense of the Constitution is defaulting the bonds, or to put it another way, refusing the bailout. That's what I advocate. Anybody here who is on a voting list and knows who your state representative is, do not send them an email. There's going to be a very close contest taking place in that building in the next couple of weeks, sooner than you think. Many people want to do the right thing. They need a reason. They need help. They need sustenance, support. A telephone call, nothing less. No emails. And make it 20 minutes. Be thoughtful, be helpful, offer to help, and give reasons. If you do that, I have 2 or 3 constituents that definitely help me decide how I understand these issues. They call me, they help me. If 2 or 3 of you have one particular representative that's on the fence, you can make a difference. And I'll tell you, it will go by 1 or 2 votes. Now, when the votes are counted, don't tell me I'm wrong because it went by more than that. When it looks like it's going to go, sometimes the whole thing collapses. But right up until the last minute, it's 1 or 2 votes. Don't forget that. Make that phone call. So I just want to leave you with that thought, and I want to thank you for the effort that you're making for saving our economy, and maybe cut that credit card, turn around this state, and make it not the 50th state anymore. It begins here today. Thank you.
Brian, how are you? I'm very well. Where do I find the telephone number to call?
Who do you want to call?
I want to call my rep.
You are an active person in Rhode Island politics. I'm sure that you know who your rep is already.
You know what exposition is?
Go to the General Assembly website.
Phone number is in the operator's manual, which is up in the library upstairs. It's also in the local libraries around the state. So those are the phone numbers. It will tell you who your rep is. The website will tell you just put in your address.
The website is quick.
Thank you, Brian.
The website is very quick.
All right, next up, we have Brian Bishop, who's a libertarian from the Stephen Hopkins Center for Civil Rights.
Thanks, Randall. I think like the advocates from the Tea Party who spoke earlier, I'm here perhaps to provide a degree of diversity from some of the perspectives we've heard already. I couldn't say that I endorse the same solutions to the state's problems that have been advocated. We do have our own version of a development bank. It's called the Providence Economic Development Partnership to help small businesses, and we can see that this doesn't always work. But I want to credit, the thing I credit Occupy Providence and the people who come here with a progressive perspective and look to North Dakota and see a land bank instead of oil. I look and I see oil, and maybe I missed the land bank. That there are policies that we could debate honestly and look to see adopted here, and I am glad to do that. What we seem to all agree on is that we were left out of the decision to loan money to 38 studios. And that brings us together. And it doesn't bring us together. I think what's also very important about this is that we don't have the knives out. Look, we might have some alternatives to the vehicles that Wall Street wants to provide, or if we're cut off on credit, we might suggest that we are going to have to create revolving funds within the state to accomplish some of these public purposes if we're really nipped in the bud. I'm not sure that we will be. And I think it's an embarrassment that our state officers are not defending our credit rating. I mean, so from whose perspective does Rhode Island look like a bad credit risk? That's ridiculous. Nobody has suggested that we're not paying things back, and nobody should treat this, by the way, as some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. Oh, isn't this handy? We can not pay if we don't feel like it. It's not our debt, but the legislature did endorse this project. And we should always encourage people to be serious in their consideration of this, not to be dismissive, but to be serious. And the problem here is that the legislature has had a habit of evading the constitutional controls that are on them. And that's something where we, ironically enough, right, a conservative with a respect for that constitutional tradition can agree with revolutionaries here today, because that prohibition on borrowing in our Constitution had its genesis in events like Shays' Rebellion following the American Revolution, where the concern about elected politicians obligating the citizens of the country to debts was a great concern. That's why that exists in the Constitution, and that's why it should be observed. So I will continue, hopefully, to be an honest and friendly debater with you about what the policy answers for Rhode Island are, but moral obligation bonding is not one of them.
Thank you, Brian. Well, we are not all men here who are opposed to 38 studios. And next up we have Liberty Goodwin. I asked her how she wants to be identified when she speaks, and she says, Liberty Goodwin, citizen, which I think deserves a round of applause.
Okay, here I am. I'm not an expert. I don't represent any organization or anybody like that. What I like to think I represent is something that's kind of weird these days. It's called common sense. Wouldn't it were more common. Okay, and I have two basic points I'd like to make. One is I am thrilled to see here representatives of Occupy together with the Tea Party and all these different diverse people here. Because doggone it, we are together, we are the people. And when we can come together on an issue, even if we disagree about a whole lot, you know, in unity there is strength. And I urge each one of you to Google, as I did, on the suggestion of Senator Whitehouse, by the way, something called the Green Tea Coalition. It's very interesting. The second thing I really would like to say is that I'm not worried about Wall Street getting annoyed with us and not being willing to give us another great big loan. That's right. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. I mean, one is that I think trying to put all your eggs in one basket, in one big corporation and huge amounts of money is not the way to go, period. It hasn't solved our problems. We've been trying this in many ways, and they, you know, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. When was this country really prosperous and fruitful? And when were the farmers having a good time and the small businesses having a good time? It was when we were small. Small is beautiful. And by small, I mean, you know, hundreds or thousands of people, individuals, small businesses, small farmers. And when they were doing it and the money was going through them, doggone it, we were prosperous. So I don't want Wall Street's money. That's it. Yeah, I agree. I don't. And final thing I want to say is I want to support my friends here who are working for public banking, for a state bank. And for those who don't know too much about it, what it really does is it funnels money through the local banks and the community credit unions, and it goes directly to people who, like a small businessman who needs a quickie loan, which he cannot get today from the big banks. And it would support all these small businesses. And yeah, some of them might fail, but you know, they deserve the right to try. And if one of them fails, I can promise you, it's not going to cost you $24 million.
All right. Next up, we have another former Red Sox player, Mike Stenhouse from the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Give him a hand, please.
Well, mainly I want you to know that this former Red Sox player doesn't mean that we, the taxpayers, should be on the hook for the dealings of some other former Red Sox player. I don't care how popular it is. We shouldn't be doing these special interest deals. Speaker Mattiello today spoke at a Northern Rhode Island chamber event, and he listed insider group after insider group after insider group after insider group that said we should pay this bond. Well, that's what this and why you're all here is about. No more. By not paying this bond, we will send a statement that these insider special deals will not be tolerated anymore in our state.
There you go.
I would submit that by not paying the bond, the credit agencies would see that act as one of the first fiscally responsible things they've ever done. And maybe if the political leadership in this state had the nerve to say, and the buck will stop here and a new era will dawn in Rhode Island, maybe our credit rating might go up. I just want to leave you with that thought, and we do want to God bless Kurt Schilling in his battle with cancer. So thank you.
Hallelujah. Well said.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to speak a little more? Because I heard you speaking to Council 6 earlier. Yeah. Sorry. All right, sounds good. Okay, next up we have Barry Schiller.
Hey, I just wanted to add a little diversity because I don't see myself as the left or the right. I'm one who believes in raising the minimum wage and investing in infrastructure and environmental protection, but I also support E-Verify and voter ID. So I'm a middle of the roader. I'm also middle class, and I have to manage my own defined contribution pension plan, which means I have to manage my own retirement account. And for insured investments, you go to a bank, you can't even get 1%. Do you know that the bondholders who we're told have insured investments are getting up to 7.75%? Did you get a chance to get insured bonds at 7.75%? They didn't ask me. And I have to manage this account, so I'm looking around. General obligation bonds I looked up with similar maturities are about 2.5%, 2.6%. That's what we should be paying for truly obligated bonds, not 7.75%. It's a scam, it's a ripoff. We shouldn't pay it back. Thank you.
So we do want to keep this open to other people who haven't been specifically invited. You can speak a little bit, you can speak for a while. Does anybody else want to say a few words? Okay, thank you.
So Dan Bedani from Infowars.com and TruthRadioShow.com. And this 38 Studios thing is just one of many things that's destroying Rhode Island, the whole democratic system, everything. Because it should have been up to the people to vote that in, not these corrupt politicians in the state house. And you know, I mean, it just disgusts me that this is going on 150 years ago. This would not be going on here in the state house. And the thing is, they're trying to take our guns away, all our constitutional rights, and this whole master level thing is just a destruction of your personal opinions. If you like a Democrat and a Republican, you can't vote on this master level thing. Then I just encourage people just to get active. Let these criminals know, hey, we don't work for you, you work for us, and you got to listen to us. We're not going to ask them, we're telling them, leave our constitutional rights alone, keep us out of deals, our taxpayers' money that's going to tank. Thank you, guys. God bless.
Thank you. If anybody else has things on their mind, please keep them in mind. We will have a chance to call on other people later. I'm going to say a few words about what's going on here. One thing to be aware of is, if you look at the media coverage of this issue, there's one big thing they're always misleading about. And I don't blame them, because it's really the politicians who've been planting this bad way of looking at it. What they keep talking about is what's going to happen to our bond rating. I'm going to tell you, bond ratings do not have any direct impact on the state whatsoever, because the credit rating agencies will rate the bonds, but smart investors know that the credit rating agencies can't be trusted. And in fact, the credit rating agencies were partly responsible for the big financial crisis of 2008, 2007, 2009, because they slapped AAA ratings on investment products that turned out to be totally useless. In fact, Standard & Poor's, which is now threatening to downgrade our bond rating as a state to B, was actually sued by the federal government, and in that lawsuit they revealed some internal emails by Standard & Poor's employees, and one of them was saying, yeah, well, these bonds could be structured by cows and we would still rate it. So the smart investors know you don't trust the bond rating agencies. Maybe there are some investors who trust the bond rating agencies, but they're the ones who don't do very well in the market. So yes, we do have these threats from the bond rating agencies that they may take our bond rating down, but it doesn't really matter whether they take our bond rating down to BBB or to B or even to D, because if they took our bond rating down to some ridiculous level like B or D, then that investors would still know, the smart investors would still know, look for yourself. If Rhode Island voters approve a bond on the ballot, is Rhode Island going to repay it? Yes. And the answer is yes, because a Rhode Island voter-approved bond is not the same as the kind of shady deal like 38 Studios, which was never approved by the voters, which was kept from most people in the General Assembly, and which in fact was unpopular voters, polls before the bond was issued showed that over 50% of the voters were against the deal. That was a WPRI poll and a Brown poll too. And the 38 Studios bond was never even officially state debt, as many people have said so far. The bond document said this is not a debt of the state, it's not an obligation of the state, even though politicians and some people in the media keep calling it a debt and an obligation. And it's, the only thing it was borrowing by the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation. The Rhode Island Commerce Corporation is responsible, the state of Rhode Island is not. So this is not our debt, and smart investors know the difference. So yes, I'll tell you what will happen if we refuse to pay the debt. What's going to happen is the rating agencies are going to retaliate. They are going to cut our bond rating, probably substantially, because they, even though they're not very good at seeing what's a good credit risk, they do see themselves as enforcers. They do want to penalize any state that tries to get out of this moral obligation scam, because rating agencies and the rest of Wall Street make a lot of money, as people have been saying, on the excessive interest rates for these moral obligation bonds. And if Rhode Island is the first state to stop paying, then moral obligation bonds are likely to disappear around the country. People are not going to be able to get away with them anymore. Politicians will not be able to get these shady loans arranged for their friends without voter approval. So yes, if Rhode Island is the first state to do that, there are people in Wall Street that want to retaliate, and the rating agencies, which are Wall Street's enforcers, will be the first people to do that. But like I said, it doesn't matter if they cut our rating to B or D, because all that's going to happen is the smart investors will know that our real voter approved debt is just as good a deal as before, and if the market sets interest rates on our debt that's slightly higher, that's enough to make our debt into a market-beating opportunity, because our debt, our voter-approved debt, is just as good an investment after we refuse to pay as before. If the interest rate on our voter-approved debt goes up by a fraction of a percent, that's big money to the bond market. And if it goes up by a fraction of a percent, when before it was an okay investment, then it becomes a market-beating investment, and the smart investors are going to flock in. And people say that because we're a small state, we can't afford to defy the bond market. Actually, being a small state works to our advantage, because we don't borrow that much money. All we need is a few smart investors to know that our debt is just as good a deal as before, and if the interest rate goes up by 0.5% or something like that, then that's going to make it a good deal for every savvy investor in the country. That's happened before. In the 1980s, when Wall Street wanted the state of Washington to bail out some bonds for the Washington Public Power Supply System. Even though it was nuclear power, it wasn't the state of Washington's debt, but Wall Street was saying that if the state of Washington doesn't step in and use taxpayer money to bail out those WPPSS bonds, then they were going to penalize the state of Washington and refuse to lend money to the state of Washington unless the interest rate was hiked by a huge amount. In fact, the governor of Washington then was presenting a study. This was back in the 80s. Governor of Washington was presenting this study by an allegedly independent firm that said state of Washington might have to pay 2% more interest on its voter-approved bonds. Sounds kind of familiar to us here in Rhode Island. That was what they were threatening with them with, 2% more interest on their voter-approved bonds. Well, what happened was the rate on their voter-approved bonds did go up, but by a fraction of a percent, not 2%. Nowhere near as much as was being threatened. In fact, one of the top investment banks on Wall Street at the time, Shearson, which later merged with Lehman Brothers, unfortunately, but Shearson was one of the top investment banks at the time. Shearson was actually recommending state of Washington bonds to their clients because they said, we see this as a great profit-making opportunity. So some people on Wall Street refused to lend to the state of Washington, but they were the ones who lost out. The smart investors moved in, were able to charge a slightly higher interest rate, which was more than they could get normally, and they made a killing, and it was great for everybody involved. and that extra interest rate did not last very long. It was a fraction of a percent to begin with, but within a few months, the interest rate hike started dropping, and within 2 or 3 years, Washington state bonds were trading at exactly the same amount as other similar states, and Washington was even able to refinance the bonds that it issued when Wall Street was retaliating. It was able to refinance them and get a lower interest rate. So that's what happened in the past. So what I want you guys to take with you is, don't listen to the people who say to try to scare you about the bond rating agencies and how our rating is going to drop, because our rating does not matter. Anybody who's talking about our bond rating is trying to mislead you. The real thing that matters is what investors are actually going to charge us to lend us money, knowing that our bonds remain a good deal. And that's what Speaker Mattiello has never been willing to look into, and Governor Chafee has never been willing to look into. Speaker Mattiello went to New York recently and talked to the bond rating agencies, and we're supposed to trust him for his conversation. But no, he did not ever talk to the actual investors who buy the bonds, and that's the people who you have to talk to get an idea. So the fact that the advocates of this bailout are refusing to actually deal with the fact that we need to find out what the bond investors are going to do, that shows they can't be taken seriously. So I want to tell you also about Mattiello. You know, Mattiello, our new speaker, not much of an improvement on our old speaker, is kind of shifty. So he was saying earlier this year, he says, I haven't made up my mind yet about whether we should spend taxpayer money on this. He said he hadn't made up his mind. But last year, when the House of Representatives was debating whether to spend taxpayer money on these bonds, I was there in the floor debate, and I saw Mattiello repeatedly telling people that we have to pay this bonds, and he was intimidating people because he was Fox's number 2. He was the majority leader then, and he was standing up and telling everybody, we have to pay these bonds. And now he comes and says, this year after he becomes speaker, he says, I'm undecided. But, of course, no surprise, he's actually come out recently and said, yeah, I'm convinced. He doesn't give us any good reason for being convinced, but he says, I'm convinced we've got to spend taxpayer money on this bond. Well, it's not his money, so I can understand that. But just want to tell you about something. Mattiello was Gordon Fox's number 2, right? Not just recently, but back in 2010, when Gordon Fox was helping to arrange this deal, Mattiello was Gordon Fox's number 2. And in the press release, where they announced this deal with 38 Studios, in the press release where the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, which was known as the EDC back then, they issued a press release about this deal with 38 Studios, and the CEO of 38 Studios was thanking all these politicians for helping to make this deal possible. So the CEO of 38 Studios thanked Gordon Fox, who was the top guy in House leadership then. Mattiello was number 2. And the CEO of 38 Studios also thanked Stephen Constantino, who was the head of the House Finance Committee, who ranked just below Mattiello in House leadership. So the people above and below Mattiello in the chain of command were involved in making this deal happen. And you want to believe that Mattiello didn't know about what was going on? You want to believe Mattiello wasn't involved in it? I don't think so. I think Mattiello knew all about it, and he was involved in it from the beginning. And if he is going to tell us that it's necessary to spend our money for this, we have to wonder, what is this covering up on his part? What kind of involvement did he have in this shady deal? We don't know, because voters are never told about what happens in the state house leadership that runs these things, because it's all done behind the scenes. But there's a lot of reasons to be suspicious, starting with Mattiello's own words last year and his own position at the time when all this was happening. So let's be I don't think we should take anything Mattiello says for granted on this, because we know he has to cover up these things. And, you know, one other thing about this is, you know, Mattiello said that he was going to do his due diligence and find out what the best option was for the public. Well, I got to tell you, in Rhode Island, House speakers are traditionally not the watchdogs who are trying to make sure the taxpayers don't get ripped off. You never see House speakers being those kind of watchdogs to make sure to stop the taxpayer rip-offs. What House speakers are is they're the people who make these shady deals behind the scenes. That was true for Fox, and I have no doubt it's true for Mattiello as well. And if you're the House Speaker, if you can ensure that anybody who invests in these shady deals is going to get paid no matter what, then you're in a better position to make more of these shady deals in future. That's the incentive that a speaker has. The speaker isn't the one spending this money. It doesn't cost the speaker anything to pay this money. But if the speaker ensures that people get paid for these past shady deals that he was involved in the past, then people are going to be more willing to make more shady deals with him in the future, and it helps his power. So I think we should be suspicious of that, given Mattiello's record, given the record of the previous speaker, Gordon Fox, who's now under federal investigation for things apparently related to 38 Studios, and given the record of the speaker before that, William Murphy, who helped to promote the careers of Fox and Mattiello, and is now a high-priced lobbyist who is profiting off more shady deals given his reputation for being somebody with clout. So it's a good thing that so many people from across Rhode Island with all sorts of political views are standing up against it, because the people in the State House are going to do more rip-offs like this if we give them a chance, and stopping this bailout is going to benefit Rhode Island's economy, not just because of the $75 million that we saved, not just because of the interest on that $75 million that we saved, but because it's going to stop more shady deals like this from happening in the future. And, you know, if we have to pay a little bit more interest, a fraction of a percent more on our bonds, then actually that just makes our bonds a more attractive deal, and the people who know Rhode Island will find it a better investment. And I'm saying in particular, Rhode Islanders who are looking for bonds to invest in can invest in the bonds of our own state, because they'll be cheaper, they'll be carrying a higher interest rate, so Rhode Islanders will be able to cash in on this good investment for cheap, because Rhode Islanders know more than people in the rest of the country that we remain committed to paying these bonds. So it doesn't just help the Rhode Island economy by saving $75 million plus interest, it actually helps Rhode Island investors because it gives them a new investing opportunity, because they believe in Rhode Island and they know that when we say we approve a bond on a ballot, we mean we approve the bond. I could go on about more ways this saves money, but let me just say this is not just about money. Even if it costs us a little money, most Rhode Islanders would be willing to spend a little money to make sure that the people who do these shady deals do not get away with it. So we can set a good precedent for the rest of the country. I know a lot of politicians say it will harm our reputation if we don't spend money on these bonds, and they're right. It will harm our reputation with the people who want to make shady deals. That's the kind of way we want our reputation to be harmed. Yes, we want to have a bad reputation among the people who want to make shady deals, among the bond insurance companies that try to profit off these deals, selling insurance they think they'll never have to pay. We want to have a bad reputation with these people on Wall Street who want to take advantage of us with absurdly high interest rates and with bond rating fees. We want to have a bad reputation with all these people who are responsible for driving our economy into a terrible place. But we want to have a good reputation with people who hate corruption and people who want to live in a place where the citizens stand up to corruption, and that's what Rhode Island should be. Thank you. Great job. So I thought I just saw one of the Robert. Yes. You wanted to speak. So Robert Mallon from the Rhode Island People's Assembly.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. How are you?
A famous American said, you can fool some of the people some of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. But these guys here don't get that. This is a joke. Anybody looking at who would spend money that could be covered by insurance? There's insurance on this. If you had something that was stolen or you lost, you would wait to find out if the insurance company paid first. But that's not what they're thinking. They just want to dust it under the rug, because I was at the State House when this deal went down, and these guys were starstruck by Kurt Schilling. I think they would have given away a family member to ride in the car with them. And they weren't thinking. They just had a leave of their senses. This thing happened in about 3 days. 3 days. When this started, there was small business associations and progressives that were trying to get what business people in the community said they needed to grow their business. Not what some $80,000 study said they needed, what they said they needed. And you know what they needed? $30,000. They didn't want more than that. They needed new refrigerators. They needed to cover salaries while they're expanding. That's what the mom and pops and the small businesses wanted.
That's what it was supposed to go through.
And that's what it was supposed to go through as, until Dandy Don Kachiri came pulling up in the limo, and they had a row of guys. They went in there, and these guys came out like they had just shaken hands with Jesus or something. They were praying to the God of money, and they were not thinking straight. I saw that. You know, speaking of money, they decided to buy open space, which they're supposed to be protecting, to build parking lots for the mucky mucks. So it seems like, oh, and when they did it, they also cut benefits for women and children to be able to feed their kids in this laggard economy that just does not seem to get better. And they took money away from something that would pay for seniors for what is still the leftover of the donut hole on Medicare for drugs. So you still have seniors deciding between buying their medication or buying their food, but they can go throw away how much money? How much money is this?
125 with interest?
125. Is that a lot of money to you?
That could add up to real money after a while.
That could add up to real money after a while. $125 million, they're just willing to say, forget about it. You know, we're going to pay, it's too much of a hassle to think about us during that horrible state. Well, I think that that is a shame that they won't be more responsible and take your money seriously and take care of the business of Rhode Island the way it should be taken care of. This is poor stewardship of our money, wasting money on this. This is something that should not happen. They should not have to think twice about it. And it's a shame that there are no Democratic representatives that have come here to talk about it, because when this was Don Kachiri's deal, there was plenty of criticism from the Democrats. But now they just want to sweep it under the rug. So I say, let's not sweep it under the rug. Let's move forward, building our economy from the ground up. I think Randall built a great case for why this is good from Rhode Island. The more we can keep the vultures from Wall Street out of Rhode Island, the better off we are, because they're looking to take the money, sock it away in a Swiss bank account. That's what they're looking to do. So I'm going to just wrap up here and thank you all for coming down for this important issue, and to tell you on behalf of the People's Assembly, for the West Side and the South Side to talk about throwing away 138, or I think it's really 130-something million dollars, when they couldn't come up with money to fix a swimming pool compared to this.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to take, and it's really hard to think that you're being represented. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Robert. just want to say, Robert, before you came in, we did have a Democratic representative speak on this. It was Representative Spencer Dickinson from North Kingstown.
All right, well, thank you, Spencer, for coming down.
Yep, and we are going to have, he's not the last representative to speak here, but some of them are still inside. I know for sure that one more is coming out because I just spoke to him. But for now, yes, I think you want to speak? Just say your name and
My name is Art Togerman. I'm a resident of Rhode Island. I'm a registered independent. And the governor very wisely chose to not throw good money after bad by refusing to bail out 38 studios when he was elected. For some reason, he's changed his mind and decided to bail it out after all. This is a mistake, and it would be good money after bad. The state should pursue recovery in the courts instead. I'm very tired of the state becoming just a chump for mob schemes. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
would anybody else like to speak? Anybody just want to say a few words? Doesn't have to be long. Okay. Sorry, looks like we have a couple more minutes.
When is the Master Lever rally over?
The Master Lever ended just before ours started.
Okay.
So yes, and actually it was very interesting to see a lot of the, when I was...
Well, I have an announcement to make.
Okay, go ahead, make your announcement.
Well, you can make it. You know, the hotel workers, this is this other shock, you know. 100 million, just throw it away, but to pay a hotel worker a living wage, which means that he's making a living, that he's not working to be in debt. He's not working to be in poverty. They've been fighting this for months against essentially one of the biggest development groups in Providence, which ironically is asking the city for a tax break.
Another one.
Another tax break. So they're having a rally down at City Hall. And if you could come over after this and show your support, I know that they would appreciate it, because this was something that looked like it was going to be settled like over a year ago. And they basically told them, gave them the shaft, and then they told them, we know where we can get money from, and guess who it is? The taxpayers of the city of Providence. So if you're a Providence resident, it's probably double important to go down there. So thank you.